A lot of it is probabilities. There's no guarantees that you're making the right decision. Distinguishing effective decision making versus just decision making. Again, this over and over again in literally every episode. By being intentional within our decision making, we can be more effective.
There are many tactics or strategies that you can take within decision making to mitigate the chances of you landing on the worst possible outcome.
Sure. There is information, there are tools, there are things that we can do within our control to increase the probability of whatever the desired outcome is.
When I am decision making in a scenario where I have the time to be thoughtful, is to do so from a place of calm and to not let emotion override logic.
Welcome to the Transferable Everything podcast. Again, I'm your host, Daniel Schulteis, and my co-host, James Keating. And this week, we're going to talk about decision making as a chapter in the book, Transferable Everything, hopefully coming soon. Okay, so we're going to begin this podcast this time where I'm going to read a quick summary of the chapter, kind of the intention of the chapter, and an overview, I guess, or summary of what we're going to talk about.
Cool.
All right. Decision making. This is one of the most undertrained skills in human life, and yet it might have the greatest impact on the quality of our lives. We all make decisions every day. Most of the time, we don't ever realize we're making them. We drift through our days as if we're passengers, carried along by habit, environment, and the expectations of others. But every moment is a mosaic of choices. Some barely register. Others shift our entire trajectory. Whether we acknowledge it or not, each one contributes to the current carrying us forward. In this chapter, I make a distinction between decision-making and effective decision-making, because there is a difference. The same way there's a difference between communication and effective communication. One just happens, the other moves you somewhere with intention. One of the things I want to focus on today is something most people never consider when they make a decision. We tend to evaluate decisions based on the immediate outcome, the first order effect. Will this work? Will this solve the problem in front of me? And sometimes it does, but that is only the beginning. Every decision has a second order effect, the consequence of the consequence, and then a third order effect beyond that, the ripple you didn't see coming because you were too focused on the splash. A business leader lays someone off to cut costs. The first order is the budget improves. Second, the remaining team absorbs the workload. Morale drops, trust erodes. Third order, your best people start quietly looking for the exit because they no longer feel secure. You solved the budget problem. You created a retention crisis. The decision looked right at the first level and was catastrophic at the third. This applies everywhere, in parenting, in relationships, in how we treat people, in the small daily choices that seem significant. The parent who solves every problem for their child gets a first order win. The child is happy. The second order, the child never learns to solve problems on their own. Third order, you've raised an adult who cannot navigate adversity. The intention was love. The outcome was dependency. Not because the decision was made with bad intent, but because it was only evaluated at the first level. Effective decision-making requires you to think beyond the immediate, to ask not just what happens next and then what after that. It's not about predicting the future perfectly. It's about expanding the frame wide enough to see where the ripples might go before you drop the stone. The chapter also explores why our biology works against us under pressure and what we can do about it. And one of the hardest realities of decision-making that almost no one talks about, the absence of feedback. In some areas of life, you get immediate consequences. You touch the hot stove and you learn. But in business, in parenting, in the decisions that shape who we become, the feedback loop barely exists. You make the choice, you commit, and then you wait. Sometimes months, sometimes years, sometimes you never find out if you were right. That requires a different kind of discipline. I share a personal story in the chapter about a decision my wife and I made. At the time, it seemed cautious, maybe overcautious. It turned out to be the most important decision we ever made. I'll tell that story inside the chapter, But the reason it matters here is the decision was made without knowing the stakes. We had no feedback mechanism telling us we were right. We simply weighed what we knew, acknowledged what we didn't, and chose the path that left room for the unexpected. We thought about the second and third order effects, even when the first order seemed safe. That is the skill, not certainty, not perfection. The integrity of the process. Are you deciding based on your values or the pressure of the crowd? Are you thinking one move ahead or three? Are you evaluating the splash or watching where the ripples go? The quality of your life is the accumulated result of the decisions you make. Not just the dramatic ones, the daily ones, the ones no one sees. And every single one of them has consequences beyond the ones you planned for. That's what this chapter is about. All right, there we go.
Right on.
I think this is a good way to start the podcast because it kind of sort of level sets everybody listening.
Yeah.
And it contextualizes in a more meaningful way. Looking back at some of the episodes we've done, especially in clip format, it can be kind of vague. So hopefully this helps start off by bringing everyone to a level playing field and understanding the intent, especially because there's no book out.
Yeah.
This is just a conceptual, philosophical conversation about the topic of this chapter, being decision making. So
cool.
Anyways, what are your thoughts?
A lot of thoughts.
Wonderful.
In thinking about this prior to the conversation as it stands, as I said, I was taking some notes last night. I was thinking about my personal concepts and ideas around decision making, how I make decisions.
Yeah.
Focused almost exclusively on the decisions where I'm given at least a little bit of time. I didn't really. You were speaking about we make decisions constantly, all the time, ones we're not necessarily aware of.
Sure.
I'd like to hear a little more about your thoughts on those because I barely spent any time thinking about that.
Okay. So a quick example that comes to mind is for the longest time, I used to get into my vehicle to go to work, and I know how to get to work, so I don't need directions.
Right.
So I would never use maps on my phone. And that makes sense. That's just how I've always done it. Once I know how to get where I'm going, I no longer need directions. Then one day, I got stuck behind an accident, and I thought to myself, why didn't I just put in my maps that I'm going to work, despite knowing that how to get to work? So it was a choice that I was making every day because that's just what I was accustomed to.
Right.
And now I make the choice every morning to turn on my maps to go to work so it can help me anticipate any delays with traffic and so forth. So downstream of that, if I am going to be late, I can start to let people know in advance.
Right.
Instead of sort of like getting closer and closer and thinking, okay, I'm so far now, there's no chance. Whereas if I'm in my driveway, I've left with enough time and it's calculated an accident that I can't see or I've not moved close enough to know that it exists, I can already start to make calls in advance and extend courtesy, something that I would like to give, my coworkers is courtesy where possible. And so it affords me the opportunity. And that's like a small decision-making shift where I realized, what am I doing? I know this thing exists. I knew that maps could calculate these things, but how I chose maps was how it used to be used, which was, do you have directions? Yes or no? Flowchart says, okay, no, I don't know how to get there.
Yeah.
Now use maps. And that was the only application I was thinking about it for.
Right.
And so I was in this loop until I broke out of it. And I think there's so many examples like that.
Sure. That's a really small example that could be blown up into more specific workplace examples. One of the things I have noted here with respect to decision making is risk tolerance and trust.
Right.
So in your particular example, we could draw a parallel between that and a coworker, in that the GPS is your risk analyst for traffic.
Yeah.
You don't know what the traffic is going to be like. They're an expert, so there's a level of trust that is being put into this thing to give you a better result,
Yes.
which is a decision in and of itself.
Yeah. That's right. There's multiple layers within it because it's becoming a tool to help me be the person I want to be. I want to be a person that's considerate of others.
Right.
And so that affords me that opportunity because the more time I can provide my coworkers, the more in alignment I am with the person I want to be versus the person I'm acting out. Now, previously, of course, everyone can be compassionate and so forth, but I don't even need to call on them to sort of share that resource of compassion towards me because there's a tool that exists that I can simply choose to use that makes it so I can be considerate of them with enough time that it doesn't put them out in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, there's so many layers to it, and in something so simple, there's so many layers, and that's why I think like distinguishing effective decision making versus just decision making. Again, we say this over and over again in literally every episode. Intention,
Right.
And so by being intentional within our decision making, we can be more effective with the outcomes we want to derive. And, I talked about sort of like the second, third, fourth order of effects. And like, that's an example where I can account for a third order of effect is that, none of my coworkers, or I've decreased the probability that they may have resentment towards me because I'm either consistently late or not letting them know in advance, if that makes sense.
100%. And even when you are leveraging your tools correctly, the GPS, for instance, and I don't want to diminish the capabilities or like the capacities of my coworkers by reducing them to a tool, but we are leveraging their abilities or these tools. Regardless, there are going to be many multiple possible outcomes. Even in what we predict the outcome to be, it might not always land exactly where we want it to.
Sure.
And to go a step further, it's also possible that the worst outcome will occur.
Right.
I think when it comes to decision making, it's very important to accept that that is the case.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so much of decision making is, yeah, okay, you're thinking about second, third, fourth order effects, but you're also like, a lot of it is probabilities. There's no guarantees that you're making the right decision. You're just intentionally trying to make the right decision and trying to consider everything that's involved. It's sort of like some of the other topics like work ethic or effort towards something. It doesn't guarantee an outcome.
No.
Right? I tried my very best. I did everything I thought possible, including the decisions I was making to try and become a professional soccer player. Decisions like, really not going to parties and training more, even on my own. That's a decision making towards my work ethic, towards the things that are necessary to try and become the thing I wanted to become. And still I failed. Still I never became a professional soccer player.
Yeah.
Despite all of that. But it increased the probability. Had I not done those, probability goes down.
Sure.
Doing those, probability goes up. And of course, if we're trying to achieve something, we want to increase the probability, not decrease it.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess for me, it's all to say there are many tactics or strategies that you can take within decision making to mitigate the chances of you landing on the worst possible outcome.
Sure.
Or not even the worst, the less desirable outcomes. Yeah. And there is going to be a hierarchy of outcomes.
Yeah, totally. And it goes back to, if there's a couple like sort of undercurrents to the things that we're talking about. Ironic because we're talking about what Transferable Everything is about, the undercurrents. And each of these chapters is an undercurrent, but below them there's more. And so I would say that's one of them. So the second sort of undercurrent is that, there's things that are within our control and things that are not. And so, there's going to be tons of things that we can't control, especially within decision making.
Yeah.
There's only so much information that we can get. But there is information, there are tools, there are things that we can do within our control to increase the probability of whatever the desired outcome is. And the better we can be at selecting those things within our own decision making, the greater the chance that the things that aren't within our control don't win, if you will. I mean, sometimes they help us, sometimes they don't, but I sort of like to think that, I don't want to be reliant on some good fortune from an uncontrollable.
Yeah.
You want to try and take the things that are in your control. Things like effort, things like decision making. It's about being thoughtful, thinking deeply. And there's a trade-off there. And I think that's important to discuss is oftentimes with the things that we're talking about, there's a tension that exists because there are trade-offs.
Yeah.
If you're deeply thoughtful about everything, that if your mind is constantly thinking and analyzing, there is a trade-off. Maybe a level of peace. Maybe you no longer have the ability to kind of settle down as much.
Yeah.
Now there's tools for that. If you can go for a walk in nature, if you can find some quiet time detached from things, of course. So it's understanding the trade-offs. But if you desire some sort of an outcome, whether you like it or not, the decisions you make intentionally towards that outcome will impact whether you get there or you don't. And so understand the trade-offs and be okay with that.
Do you specifically have any tools or strategies or anything that you embody when it comes to decision making that you found improves your ability to steer yourself towards a more favorable outcome?
Yeah, I think thoughtfulness is one of those things. And I've had to get better at it. It might be something that comes a little bit more naturally to me if I think back on my life. My brain's always working,
right,
kind of thing. Obviously, I've tried to put it to good use to the best of my ability, and this might be one of those. But I think experience helps as well.
Yeah.
And by experience, I don't mean the thing that always drove me crazy, which is like just being older, right? Like that's kind of one of the premises in the book is like age doesn't equate.
Older doesn't mean wiser in every case.
Yeah,
sure.
Said differently.
You'll know better when you grow up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, age can afford you more experience over time.
Especially when it comes to pattern recognition, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. But I think having a diverse set of experiences has been quite helpful. And so, that could be jobs, and there's plus and minus on every side of things. As an employer, of course, I want people to, especially great people, to spend a career working with me. But at the same time, at a personal level, I also recognize that there's value for the individual to be able to have different jobs within their life, and they can become a better version of themselves, both personally and professionally, because of those experiences. It allows you to account for more variables. It widens the lens at which you can look at the world. You have a greater understanding. So, to simplify the idea a little bit, if you're a project manager, but you've had experience working in logistics, in warehouses, you've worked in customer support, you've worked in, it doesn't have to be the exact trade of the project that's being done, but you've worked in or on a construction site of some sort, and you understand the dynamics, the tensions that exist there, all of those things. You're going to be a more effective project manager from those experiences alone, you can be, rather than somebody who sort of has only gone from school directly into project management and they've only held jobs as a project manager.
Right.
It's hard to account for the variables. You know, you're sort of managing at a distance if you've never been in the weeds and you don't know all of them.
Yep.
There's ways around that. You can talk to people and you can learn through their experiences, hear what they say. Hopefully they're a trustworthy individual and you can start to account for some of those things. There's sort of like secondhand learning through experience that way.
Yep.
I think that's a lot harder for someone to get to that place than sitting in it themselves. So I think that's something, because a lot of decision making includes considering a lot of variables. So you could be deeply thoughtful, but if you don't know what to consider, that's also going to be really challenging as well. And so, you know, taking different jobs, if possible, if your circumstances or your situation allows for it, and you do so intentionally. Again, that word keeps coming up.
Yeah.
But you intentionally do so as a form of education. Hey, I'd like to work in this industry, then this industry, because I'd really like to learn from each of them, and I'm going to absorb everything I possibly can within them. That's beautiful. You'll learn more that way, certainly, than you will just sort of theorizing everything.
100%.
Right? And you don't even need to be in it for that long to start to account for the variables. If you're actually paying attention, you could just go into the job, even a couple months, guaranteed. You could be like, okay, I see what's happening here. I'm observing. I'm downloading, you know, a lot of the circumstances. I'm seeing some of the tensions. Yeah, you're not going to be able to go in the same depth.
Yeah.
But I think decision making comes, you know, this goes back to David Epstein's range, is becoming a bit of a generalist, and having the width within your lens to account for everything. If you're too deep, you might fail to be able to look left, right, connect everything.
Yeah. You're almost not eliminating, but reducing your blind spots.
Yeah. Yeah. And as well, having a very strong support system and network of people you can talk to that are willing to be honest with you, and that you can sort of bounce ideas off of in sort of like a creative way. And you don't feel, you know, it's a safe place for you to do that, where they can give you honest feedback. It's almost a superpower if you have enough people, especially if they're versatile in how they think. You know, a number of my friends don't think exactly the way I do. And not that that's by design and intentionally. The friendships are often formed on the virtues rather than the shared interests, which means we differ in interests. And so when we have a conversation about a thing, or I ask them about something to lean on them, you know, we're sharing the virtues, which is great because I can trust then where they're coming from, but they're adding to the diverse set of experiences and interests because that's where we differ.
Right. Yeah. It's, to the point about leaning on people as well for their expertise, there has to be the humility component.
Yeah.
Where there's a genuine recognition of knowing what you don't know. And then, like I said earlier, there's a risk tolerance and a trust component in that you have to trust this individual is the expert that they've been presenting themselves as.
Sure.
But again, you need to be able to relinquish that control.
Yeah.
To allow them to help steer you towards the outcome that you're hoping to. You might not have full decision-making capacity, but you have a decision over who gets to help you. Yeah.
And just to kind of like level set for everybody, for anyone who hasn't listened, which is probably most people who haven't listened to all the previous episodes, you know, and each episode is in a sequential order by design because that's how the book chapters are going to go, is that, you know, a couple chapters ago, if we go back to where we began with a vision of who we want to be, something to aim towards, then courage, then humility, etc. And those are necessary by the time you get downstream to the decision making. If you've not deployed enough humility, enough courage, then you're going to be inhibited in your ability to actually make good decisions because you can't even do this step within decision making as effective as you otherwise could. A lot of people are married to the first thing that comes to mind, that sort of first order effect as their decision. We get into adaptability in the next one, the next episode and chapter, but so I don't want to touch on that one too much. But that's where the humility comes in. I might have an idea, and to sort of make things easier, if I'm going to lean on you, James, I might say, okay, I need to make this decision for these reasons. I add context and I explain the variables I've considered, because I want to walk you through reverse of my decision making. If I just say, here's the scenario, here's the decision, you're going to look at that and you're going to be like, okay, might make sense.
Sure.
Or we're going to waste each other's time because you're going to be like, well, what about this variable? Did you consider this? And maybe I already have.
Yeah.
If I just walk you through the totality of my decision making, everything I've considered, then you can look at it for what it is if you actually think that it creates the outcome. But also you can kind of point out if I was clear in my thinking. Did I consider all the variables, and are they even accurate variables? It gives you everything you need to be a support mechanism to me. But if I don't have the courage or the humility to actually share all of those things because I'm afraid you're going to judge me, or I feel connected to this decision that I would like to make, or I want to make it, so I'm more interested in convincing you than actually laying everything out honestly, and just so you'll support me, then I'm creating the conditions or setting myself up to make a less effective decision.
To that point, one of the things that I wrote down when I was thinking about decision making, some of the things that I believe have a high level of importance, or I would consider a concept when it comes to optimized decision making, assuming you have the time for it, because of course some decisions have to happen quickly, and that's context specific. Simply what I wrote down was data, and as much of it as you can reasonably get with the time that you have.
Yeah.
I require data in my decision making. And as you were saying in your example, if I have somebody that I'm going to be leaning on to assist with that decision or to help inform, I need to give them all of the data that I already have in order to ensure that they're providing me with an adequate amount of, or rather correct data to inform my decision making after like the brainstorming is all said and done.
Right.
So number one, the first one that came to mind is that when I am decision making, like in a scenario where I have the time to be thoughtful, is to do so from a place of calm, and to not let emotion override logic.
Yeah. So we were kind of talking about that before we went live.
Yeah.
Emotional regulation, of course, is a critical part of decision making, and I think we touched on that in one of the previous episodes in one of the other chapters. But there's a couple things, because yes, it helps you make a better decision overall, but it also, depending on the decision or the state of mind you're at when you're making the decision, is if you're decision making from a place of like the lizard brain, your emotions are really high, there's a possibility you don't just select the wrong, there's a possibility you don't just make the wrong decision, you compound maybe an issue you're trying to solve by making it worse because of that. And so there's multiple layers there, I think. But
well, it was like you were saying about the degrees of subsequent effects.
Yeah.
If you are overwhelmed with emotion and you can't override that with logic, odds are you're probably only solving for the first order effect.
Yes. Yeah. Because anyone who's experienced sort of like the flood of emotion in that lizard brain knows that it's sort of like a narrowing of your perspective. And just like I was saying a minute ago about like sort of the generalist, it sort of prevents you from being the generalist in the decision making, because your vision goes from wide, or whatever your wide capacity is, and it starts to narrow. You can just think of the thing that solves it immediately and the most, or maybe satisfies a part of your brain, that lizard part, that any other day you're like, I don't want to make decisions from that place because there's no guarantee it aligns with the person I've said I want to be or the types of decisions I want to make. And so this one you can control. Largely the lizard brain decision-making place you can't. So you want to try and recognize when sort of these floods of emotions are sort of coming on you. And like a good way to do that, for example, is to just pause, breathe, box breathing. It's one of the best ways to sort of contain that part of the brain, the lizard brain. And it's where you can take back some control of your autonomic nervous system, that lizard brain. You can say, hey, I'm in control.
Sure. And
you pause simply so one, you can do that, but two, so you can try and push back and give some space to allow, that the part of your brain that you want to be using, that rational part within the decisions, so you can have clarity. Because clarity comes from with seeing everything, not from how narrow you are with, blinders on.
Mm-hmm. And when you're afforded the time to be a little more thoughtful, you can realize or determine what the true stakes are when it comes to that decision.
Right.
How deep is the outcome going to be in terms of its impact on what I want it to be, effectively?
Absolutely. And I should just note too, I don't want to, even though we're trying to add complexity and layers to it, there's still like an oversimplification of like, this is what you do.
Yeah.
And we're very complex beings.
Sure.
And so I want to recognize that it's not as easy as, okay, think of all these complex things and then just do it.
Yeah, for sure.
The action of doing it is really hard. It's harder than even acknowledging and recognizing the complexity philosophically within the thing itself.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do. And full disclosure, I fail at it all the time.
So do I.
Right? And so, but we always come back to the same thing, the intention. And every time I fail, I really try and learn from it.
Right.
Okay, well, like I thought I had control. Where did I lose myself within some of that emotional regulation? And okay, what can I do to make sure that that doesn't creep up on me? Or what did I notice happened right before I started to, be sort of the lizard brain overtook the other part of my brain, the rational side.
Yeah.
And so I can try and prevent it from happening again. Being intentional about those things, this gets into a later chapter, failure and forgiveness, but those are kind of prerequisites to just that.
Yeah, I guess I'm coming from a place, obviously, where there's a level of ownership over outcomes.
Right.
And so when I approach decision making with that in mind, there's also an undercurrent of what I'm trying to do is remove anything that is going to interfere with my ability to make the most thoughtful, logical decision of the options I have available to me. And it's also worth saying that there are smaller decisions within a larger decision-making procedure.
Yes.
And you're going to have to be able to reflect and assess as things are happening to course correct. There's going to need to be guardrails. It's not just a one and done. I've made the decision. It's over with. There's a level of monitoring and course correction and additional decision-making that happens along the way. But that's all to say, for me, the reason why I wrote down decision-making from a place of calm as number one is because I feel that is the first barrier that I need to overcome in terms of removing the other things that may interfere.
Yeah. And I think that's probably for most of us because, we talk about us all being unique, and you and I spoke about this a little bit yesterday. And this is kind of, we talk about the bar graph, that infinite bar graph, which is sort of like a fundamental part of Transferable Everything and the book. And that's where we differ. That's where I'm positing our identity can sort of lie, and those virtues, characteristics, attributes, all differing for all of us at different levels at different times. But where we're all connected, at least in part, is by the lizard brain. We all share so many similarities within our lizard brain. Where we probably differ is that bar graph's capacity to override the lizard brain in a given scenario.
Right.
And maybe that's it. Some of us are better at it than others, more generally. Some of us are better at it in certain situations than others, but we're connected. You and I are going to think very similar.
Yeah.
If we only looked at that part of the brain.
So a fun question for you, related to your state of mind going into decision making, is we can also delude ourselves into believing that we are making a decision from a place of calm when we're not.
Yeah.
So, like, do you have any strategy for like recognizing when maybe you're on the wrong side of that divide between heightened and logical?
That's a really good question. I've not thought about it exactly in those terms. I could say from a recent example that it was maybe sort of like how passionate I was. So like passion's super important. The emotional part within us, where passion sits, can be a really great driving force.
Yeah.
For athletes, it's like sort of the fire in the underbelly that drives the desire to win, the passion towards it. And there's some incredible fuel behind that. And so I think that's probably for me something that I notice when my passion is sort of heightened towards maybe an outcome. That's a pretty good indicator that, that in of itself isn't calm. So if I've sort of skipped that and I've sort of landed on a decision and not realized that it was coming from that place, but there's like this passion driving me towards it.
Yeah.
That's like, a caution sign waving around, being like, hey, pause a little bit, think a little bit deeper, and bounce the idea off of somebody.
As far as like pausing and revisiting, I think I've said it like a dozen times already, but I'm going to say it again. Obviously, there are some decisions that require very quick turnaround.
Yeah.
I don't really know where to go with the short form decision making. I'll probably get to that. I've got a few more lines before I've only have one note about that. But have you ever had decisions where there's been like a significant lull where you've decided on something, but you've had enough time to afford yourself maybe a day or a week, even a couple weeks, to really let it ruminate?
Yeah. I think a good example, because I really had to go against the grain with this one, was co-sleeping with our kids. And everything I was taught up to the moment of being a parent was that for all of the reasons, things like teaching your kids to be independent and, all of these things, the working theory was actually, I wouldn't even call it a theory. It was presented as like, this is what you do, like a scientific certainty. You put them in another room in their own crib. This is the method. It's called the cry it out method. You can let them cry for 3 hours. Don't do this. Don't go in and hug them. Don't give them a kiss. And then I become a parent, and the lizard brain, this is where it was great. And it sort of, the alarm bells made sense to me once. So it was the lizard brain that the alarm bells went off. And then I thought, okay, I need to think about this. And I had some time because, there's no rush. We didn't need immediately to put our first child immediately into a crib. Yeah. Right. And I started to think about it, and objectively, I was like, I can't see how this makes sense. It doesn't compute. Everything else we do for the child is to comfort them, to be there for them. They can't speak, so they're crying for a reason. I know that when I was a child, just by proximity, being further away from your parents, especially at night, that creates more fear in of itself. And I don't want my kids to be afraid when they're sleeping. Sleep's important. I don't want them to have all these cortisol dumps because of stress that I'm creating when maybe I don't need to. And I want them to trust me. I don't want them to feel like I'm abandoning them. And I know I can reconcile certain components like, hey, well, you want your kids to learn independence. And I thought, well, I'll teach them independence during the daytime when they've had a good night's sleep.
Right.
And they're a little bit older. And then we'll meet again at night. And when they're old enough that I can rationalize with them, hey, we're going to do this thing. You're going to be by yourself to do it. I want you to learn independence. And I can explain and contextualize for them the lesson that I want them to learn through the experience, and then repeat it so they can build on it. That's what my sort of rational brain was thinking about. And then I thought, okay, well, this is a pretty big decision for our family and for the kids and their development and my marriage. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to do some research. So I was listening to podcasts on both sides. It's not hard to find a doctor that talks about the cried out method and them being in another room, and then a doctor that's talking about the opposite.
Right.
Then I looked up some data and, I went through my own sort of logical rigors. I spoke to people that I trusted, even people who had the other opinion, and I explained to them why I think it might be incorrect and this might actually be the best decision. And I also wanted to see if it didn't previously consider that and would change their mind. A good example is my mom. Yeah. She didn't co-sleep with us, in our very young developmental years. And she was a proponent of that. And she's changed her mind. So one, complete respect. I mean, my mom's amazing. So, I know she has the humility and the courage to change her mind about something, even if she has to face the fact that it's how she parented, right? And she wishes now she didn't do it in that way. So that's...
Yeah, because look how you turned out.
Right. Exactly. And she's got to wrestle with that inside of herself. So, I mean, that's such a beautiful example because, it's easy to change your mind on maybe a topic, but to do so after that's how you parented, and now you're looking back at the decisions you made to think, 30 plus years later, that, man, I should have done something different.
Right.
That's got to be incredibly hard. And so I think that's just a really good example. I was afforded the time. Yeah. I got to think deeply. I got to check all of the boxes from sort of like scientific literature, podcasts with experts, family I trust and love, my own logical brain, my lizard brain, and then landed on co-sleeping as a strategy.
Well, so you've knocked off two, basically.
Okay, great.
Which is, again, data and as much as you can possibly afford yourself.
Yeah.
And if you have the time, take your time.
Yeah. If I can jump in, it kind of leads into something I was going to bring up, which has been a bit of a controversial topic for me.
Okay.
Which is procrastination. Something I think is really important.
Cool.
Because effectively what it does, or it can do, is it affords you time. That's the intent, or, presumably if you're doing so.
If it's intentional procrastination.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
If it's intentional procrastination, it can be a really wonderful tool.
Yeah.
Now, conversely, almost like one of the issues with like the Instagram world is you have, people saying, hey, if you do this one thing, or if you just do these 3 things, this is the outcome.
Yeah.
And, everything's more complex in most cases. In addition to that, we're more complex than something so simple. But most of us were raised being told that procrastination is bad, right? So it's the same thing we demonize or criticize on social media that influencers are doing, or some are, of course, is the same thing that most of us were taught, either at home, at school, whatever. Procrastination equals bad, always. Not true. Procrastination does not always equal bad. An example, parenting or business or whatever, take your pick. If I have something due on Friday at 3 and I complete it Wednesday, of course, depending on what it is, there's a day, 2 days, a day, 3/4 available of new information that could come to light prior to when that decision or that thing is actually due. That's a long time. And so one, you risk having to duplicate your efforts because as that new information comes in, you got to go back to the drawing board. You might get it wrong because you didn't allow for the time and you didn't revisit it prior to whenever that decision or thing was due or decision had to be made. And so if you wait, you might have an idea, right? You might think about it enough that you have an idea, but you don't actually put in the work or I shouldn't say put in the work because maybe you do some of the work ahead of time, but you don't finalize anything until it's actually due. All of the information you could possibly have has now arrived. Now, of course, you could have information after or, whatever the case may be, and you might have to pivot or you just have to accept what it is. But the thing that was in your control, you allowed to exist. You allowed all of the time that you had available to you to elapse. And then with the most information you could possibly have within the time frame given, you made the best decision. And so, yes, procrastination because you're just lazy is different. I'm not talking about that.
Right.
Procrastination as a tool.
But then in the way you're speaking about it, wouldn't it just be time management and not procrastination?
Well, it leads to improved time management.
Sure.
Because you can take on more things.
Because I mean, if I'll pull myself back to university, if I'm procrastinating on an assignment,
sure,
it means I'm literally not thinking about it at all until I start it.
Sure.
But in the example you provided, it almost sounded like you have started it in a way because you're thinking about it until you actually start the work. So
I think it can go both ways. It depends on the scenario. Obviously, there's multi scenarios, right? Parenting, business. You described university. We'd have to go through each use case, and I could probably speak to them. Sure. But in the case, let's use yours, university. Okay, you have an assignment due on Friday, and you're working on it throughout the week. But in addition to that, you've got some of your social life, which has value. You have other classes you're attending.
Sure.
So when you sit down with that work, how much are you actually doing? At least for me, and from a lot of people I've spoke to, it's really hard to compartmentalize. And we know this from work.
Sure.
It's really hard to go from a class on this topic and then move to an assignment on this topic. To shift your brain so quickly. And it's like, okay, I've got 3 hours from this class on this topic till this class on this topic. So I'm going to do work on this thing. What's the probability that if you have the full 3 hours, it's really thoughtful on that topic? And maybe it is, but does that impact how you show up to that next class and your ability to work through all three of those individual topics? And so assuming you have enough time, or you can create enough time in preparation before it's due, then you still have, of course, give yourself the amount of time required to dedicate to the outcome.
Yes.
But push it to where, now I should say as well, in university class, maybe there's no new information that could possibly come up before that assignment is due. Okay, then, and you happen to have a boatload of time where you can focus on it, then sure, okay, that's part of time management, being selective.
Sure.
But in a more sort of like rigorous schedule, you've got, a significant other in university, and you've got a bit of a social calendar that you don't want to entirely give up, and you've maybe have a part-time job and all of these things.
Right.
It's okay to procrastinate on that thing a little bit to allow you to take on all of the things that you need to do.
Sure.
Instead of, I saw so many people spend like hours in sort of post-secondary, sort of like half doing the thing because it made them feel like they weren't procrastinating. They technically were, sort of, because they're not actually fully in the moment on the thing.
Gotcha.
But they needed to say, well, I'm not procrastinating, I'm working on the thing. You're not really, you're not there, you're checked out. So put it aside, save it till you have time to actually get it done.
Yeah. I'm sure there are some people who can get away with it. It's not for me. It's not for me.
Which?
Be procrastinating. I've never been able to leverage it successfully.
And is that because, so I know for a lot of people, if they have too many things on their to-do list, that their mind is constantly like just reeling over that to-do list.
It depends on what the thing is that I'm procrastinating on.
Of course, yeah.
So if we pull it back to a university assignment, if I wait until the day before to write it, and it's a 30-page paper, I'm probably not going to do very well. And if anybody wants to pull my transcript, you'll see that that's the case.
Yeah, you know what? But obviously, I'm not the person to speak about that exactly,
sure.
But sorry, continue.
And as well, it depends on how serious I am being about the thing that I'm doing or how much I care about it. So for those people watching who don't know, I went to university to study dramatic arts, and there were a lot of things within that sphere I was really passionate about at the time. I enjoy exploring creative things. So if I am afforded a 2-week period where I can go super deep on a creative project, like that's what I'm there for. I want to do creative projects. Why would I wait until the last day and deprive myself of that growth?
Sure. And that makes sense. I'm probably thinking about it more mechanical.
I understand where you're coming from. There are things that I know are only going to take me a half hour. Right. And so I'm managing my timetable where that half hour doesn't fit today, doesn't fit for the next 5 days. That's okay. These other things are more important, so I'm going to focus on them. But I wouldn't call it procrastination. I would just call it strategic time management.
Okay, fair. That's maybe a better way of framing it. But I think, and I'm probably calling it procrastination because that's what I was accustomed to people calling it.
Fair.
Right? It was like anything that's left to the last minute, even if it's strategic time management,
sure,
as you describe it, equals procrastination. It's a very binary lens.
Yeah.
That I was accustomed to. And sometimes that was all that was required. So, that's one of the things that can be hard for academic athletes is like, okay, well, you're kind of compressing two things that are competing for your attention into one thing. And so something at some point is going to have to take a bit of a backseat. And, most people are going to say it should be athletics.
Sure. But it's like we were saying yesterday about setting priority levels for items, particularly in a workplace.
Yeah.
If everything is a high priority, nothing's a high priority.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to choose what fails and what succeeds.
Totally. And I think adding that in to the strategic time management piece, I think is really important. So I think that's a good distinction. And so to kind of like close the loop on that, procrastination, as we've often described it, isn't procrastination. There's procrastination should just be then, you're being lazy and you're just leaving it for the sake of leaving it and you're not doing anything,
sure,
etc. And the way I was trying to describe it is you've put it so much better.
Well, there's also another thing I think I pulled out of what you were saying, and maybe it was just a divergent thought, but if you're doing it as a means to intentionally limit the amount of time you can spend on doing that thing, and it is deadline dependent, you're raising the stakes, and some people perform much better when they have that pressure.
Yeah. Okay. So I was gonna bring that up as a bit of a use case. That's true for me. I remember writing a speech one time, and I was trying to think of it in advance, and I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. There was a lot of weight behind the speech. It was something I really wanted to do it justice. It felt so much bigger than myself, and it deserved it. And I needed to perform. Nothing was coming to mind. Nothing. And I tried sitting with it. And the morning of, a couple hours before I was set to do the speech, everything came out. And I still have it to this day because I loved it so much. And so that was kind of one of my first realizations that a part of me needs some of the pressure. And fortunately, I'm also okay to kind of sit with
Yeah.
a checklist
Sure.
that's incomplete and be okay and genuinely focus on the things at hand without being distracted by like, okay, well, like I've got all these things, like I can't even think about this thing because these things still exist.
Yeah.
I'm completely okay with that.
Is there a way where we can like artificially recreate those stakes? I mean to say, so let's assume you have that half-hour block.
Yeah.
If you have the discipline to say, this is the only half hour I get to work on this thing, whether it's a week before or the day before, that's your half hour, you can kind of change the stakes of the situation a little bit. Now, obviously, there is the realistic fallback where you do know, okay, well, if I feel like I want to revisit it, I can. I guess there's kind of a discipline thing there in making a decision that this is it.
I don't know. Okay, I'll give you an example because Transferable Everything, the book is that. I've blown 4 or 5 deadlines, and I don't care. I tried to hit them, but I felt like now, obviously, I ultimately can control them, but I kind of knew that.
Yeah.
And so as I got closer, I put in effort. I tried to hit them, but it wasn't a scenario where there was no way back. Because I was more concerned about the quality of the book being in complete alignment with what's in my heart. And that's more important than hitting an artificial deadline.
Right.
And so I've blown through them. If I'm not there, it's not quite what I want, then I'm going to keep going. Right.
Now, what if the deadlines aren't artificial? So I'm going to pull it into athletics.
Okay.
You have a player who has a tryout for a team on X day. If they procrastinate on mastery or practice, working towards mastery on a certain fundamental, they're never going to acquire that skill in advance of their tryout. So I think with some things, particularly with training and skill acquisition, it's not really a good idea to procrastinate.
In the way that we've sort of differentiated them, yes.
Sure.
Yes, then I totally agree, because that form of procrastination, which maybe is just the actual sort of definition of the word, it's you've robbed the opportunity of actually completing the task. So the task is not complete. If you've not showed up with a level of skill because you've not put in the effort, then yeah, the task is not complete. So the way I was describing it would have to be something more binary, but I think it's solved by the way you've described it. So in that case, I would totally agree. Like procrastination by not doing the work that's not okay.
Sure.
Waiting to the last minute to do bits of the work. Yeah, that's the same thing. You've not put in any effort. You've not done the thing. That becomes, it's more the binary ones.
Yeah. So to that, moving on to my next piece.
Yes.
If you don't have the time, hopefully it's within a framework where you have mastered the fundamentals.
Explain.
It's more to say basic fundamental principles when it comes to a sphere of a thing will allow you to decision make much quicker if you're not afforded the time to be thoughtful. So you put an experienced player on the pitch. They're in a scenario where experience and training and mastery over the game has allowed them to know immediately there are 4 outcomes that I have in this particular moment.
Sure.
Based on the data they have, they're able to make that decision really fast.
Yeah.
Somebody without the experience, they're still going to have to make a decision really fast, but they can't predict if it's going to be optimal or suboptimal.
Right. Okay, yeah. So another example of that is in business. The more experience you get in business, the quicker you can make decisions because you have a lot of the fundamentals, you have some of the mastery and the technical understandings, you have some, hopefully, wisdom behind you. hopefully you have other people's wisdom because you have some peers now that you've been able to, a bit of a network you've been able to create, and you've learned some of their lessons, and how fast you can make decisions can be a differentiator in business.
That effectively, in different words, covers off everything else I was going to talk about, which we did touch on earlier.
Sure.
Which really is moving through my sequence. First, be calm. Then use my time effectively if I have it. If I don't, hopefully I have mastery over the things that will allow me to be more effective. And if I don't have that, first, of course, the humility to recognize that, and then to rely on the people and the tools I have to affect that outcome.
Yeah. And, sometimes there's seasons in your life where it's really beneficial for you to, make decisions a lot slower. And then there's other seasons under different circumstances where it's really important to make them a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Right. Parenting. The co-sleep example, I was afforded time. There's other decisions within parenting that you have to make pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And in a very similar way, it's your kids pressuring you because they want to do something on their own. Are they ready? Do I feel like they are? Have I paid close enough attention that they can go do that thing on their own? What are the consequences? Can I think through those things very quickly? Because, that has impact at that season of parenting. If once they're going out to do something on their own, you're not there to guide them, protect them, and all of that. So you have to analyze the situations at which you allow that to happen and you don't pretty quickly. And the outcomes, unfortunately, can be pretty dire.
Yeah.
So in one hand, I had a lot of time, happy to use it. Sure. I also know that in the future, I'm not going to have as much time. And to your point, hopefully on the journey, I've paid close enough attention. I understand my kids as well as I can. I have a lot of data points because I've paid attention to them. I've read enough books and I've thought about enough variables ahead of time that'll help in how effective my decisions are when I don't have a choice of how fast I have to make them.
Right. And then we have the all-important reflection that should be occurring after you get to see the results of your decision making.
Yeah.
We can call it a after action or a debrief in business scenarios. Broadly speaking, reflection. It's important to go deep on the outcome of your decision. And to be fair, it depends on the stakes of what that decision and what that outcome is, because you want to ensure that you're learning from your failures.
Yes, because that becomes, to circle it back to one of your points at the beginning, that becomes a new data point.
Correct.
So everything goes full circle or comes full circle. New data points and hopefully the consequences of the failure of that decision are not so grave. And that's part of that risk management, risk analysis, which, we could discuss in terms of decision making is, that's all part of it. How much are you willing to risk for the outcome? And how can you analyze that?
Right. And, like I said before, I think the stakes were a little more elevated in this example where like you're a student athlete, you have academia, probably a subject you're very interested in, or I would hope so because you picked it. And then you have the sport, two things you're passionate about. If they hold an equal level of priority, one of them will fail at one point in time in order for the other to succeed. I think on a smaller level, you can make the decision to allow something to fail if the stakes are correct.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up because I think that sort of, that kind of completes the tension that exists for those athletes. But more importantly, for what I was just saying is like allowing something to fail is a decision.
Yes.
Hopefully it's intentional. It should be.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
It's part of the decision making is like, especially when you're doing multiple things concurrently, like an athlete who's in school is not everything can be priority one.
Yeah.
Something's got to give. And we've talked about this so many times, understanding the trade-offs. Mm-hmm. And that's really what that is what are the trade-offs? What are the things in tension? Something's going to have to fail. I'm okay with that. I understand what that means. I'm intentionally choosing this, whatever side you look at. I think one of the things for me that's so interesting about transferable everything and athletics is that oftentimes, everyone talks about education in terms of athletes, right? Like education has to be number one. Education has to be number one. And it could just be poor use of language, kind of like what I did with procrastination. But I think it's worth peeling apart or at least acknowledging, having a reminder that athletics can be a form of education and deeply profound.
Yeah.
And so, there's education in the formal way, which we've talked about, the institution, but athletics is education. So it's not as binary as, education first, athletics second. It's part of it. They're complementary to one another, and athletics certainly can play both roles. It can be a beautiful form of education that's going to help your child athlete learn really beautiful skills that will serve them throughout the rest of their life, especially if you help guide them with that. And of course, that's one of the purposes behind transferable everything. But, and I'm not saying that can exist in the formal institution, but to say it so in such a binary way, I think really doesn't do athletics justice.
Sure.
And it doesn't acknowledge the reality of the world that you're living in, because it's not just that.
Sure.
I wanted to circle back to second, third, fourth order effects.
Cool.
I made up a bunch of random examples. We can either unpack them or not, but I think it's worth acknowledging, because I think it's one of the things that so many people struggle with, is accounting for those variables, seeing the second, third, fourth order of effects. So I'll give an example. This one might resonate with you a little bit. So an athlete playing through an injury. The first order of effect is you stay on the pitch or in the thing because you want to help your team in the moment, like right now, today. The second order is, that exacerbates the injury, potentially makes it worse. And, whatever, maybe it was a 2-week recovery is now 2 months. Right. So that's kind of obvious. And then the third order, which is really hard to see and understand, is the exacerbation of that injury, lengthening the recovery time, maybe the severity of it. Does that end up shortening your career? The amount of years you can be playing the thing or doing the thing at the highest level. And of course, most cases it's not just one instance of that, but that decision making over and over again. And that's where, when we go back to something like grit, that's something I struggled with as an athlete. It's like, okay, I want to be gritty. Yeah, I'm hurt, but my team needs me right now.
Yeah.
We need to win this game, and I'm going to do that.
Right.
And of course, there's a place for that.
Sure.
It's not every little injury requires, the care that I'm describing in these order of effects.
But they're going to need you in the playoffs too.
Sure.
And say what you're feeling in your leg is just a bit of tension in your LCL.
Yeah.
They need me today. You go and you perform. You completely tear it because you didn't listen to that signal.
That's right.
Sure, they need you today, but they're also going to need you when it matters. That's not to say every game doesn't matter. They do. But it's short-sighted.
That's right. Now, there is a tension there.
Sure.
Because if you get lost in that too much, you might lose your ability to differentiate, is this my body giving up on me? And using that signal to say, hey, we should stop, and you can't push yourself any further. So there is a bit of reconciliation.
Sure.
You have to have, you do have to think about it a little bit. So I don't want it to be oversimplified.
Yeah.
But it's recognizing the existence, the downstream effects potentially of the decision that you make.
Yeah. And going back to what I was saying prior, there's some emotional involvement. There's a lack of data. I've got a weird feeling in my knee. I don't really know what that is. Like especially as a young athlete, I can't diagnose what's happening to me in real time. I feel some pain, but it's fine. My team needs me. And that's the emotions overriding, paired with a lack of information of thinking, oh, everything's going to be okay. And then it's not. It clouds your ability to see these additional outcomes.
Yes.
And orders of effects.
Yes.
I would also add, and I wanted to throw this in earlier. You a fan of Star Trek?
I'm sorry, no.
Okay. There's a quote from Captain Picard, played by Patrick Stewart.
Okay.
Which is, "It is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That is not weakness. That is life." I simply wanted to throw that in, particularly as it pertains to decision making, because you can do everything perfectly, and the worst outcome is still possible.
Yes.
And it doesn't diminish your efforts.
Yeah. Yeah. And that reminds me of what I was saying earlier about, I felt like so many, not perfect, but so even if it is perfect, but so many of my decisions on my journey and my attempt to become a professional soccer player were really great, even when I look back, yet I still failed. And I don't think it's because they weren't perfect.
Right.
That wasn't actually the issue, even with some hindsight.
Sure.
And so, that you have to reconcile that within your mind. Like, there are no guarantees, just increased probability. Do you want it bad enough to do that? Now, what I think one of the things we want to posit is that, we've all heard that silly phrase, it's not the outcome, it's the journey that matters.
Yeah.
And this is, I write about this in the book, which is, okay, well, like, what does that even mean? Right? So many people
we made along the way.
Yeah. Like so many times that's just sort of like thrown out there.
Yeah.
As, a whatever statement that we can gloss over. And, it's sort of a cliche one that a parent might throw at their child, like, don't worry about it. It's the journey, not the outcome. And, most children are in the back seat of the car thinking like, I don't even know what that means.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe you don't really feel the full weight of that statement until you're able to reconcile the finality of life, broadly speaking, not to get too existential. But as far as our place on this planet is concerned, there is an end date.
Sure.
And so reconciling that, how does that change the stakes of anything you do?
Sure. And the journey matters because, like we were saying, it can inform, it's data points. Things you learn become data points. It's going to inform everything else after that. And you have no idea what's after that, and that it might be more valuable. And then that journey and everything it gave you allows you to achieve the thing you happen to want more.
Sure.
And it's leaving room for the unknown, I think, at least in part.
Yeah.
And that requires some humility to recognize that, like, again, I'm using my own life example. So I wanted this thing so bad. And, I'm not saying that I don't wish sometimes that I had achieved it.
Yeah.
But there's parts of my life that came later that I didn't realize until experiencing them that I did want more.
Right.
Having kids is one of them. It's one of the hardest ones because it's really hard to imagine what it's like having kids, what it's like to love in that way. It's hard to describe to anybody. I thought the love I had for my parents or my wife, or my dog I had for so many years, I thought that was like the capacity. And then I found out that there's levels.
Sure.
And I couldn't, my mind had no capacity to grasp and understand there was more until it showed up.
Yeah.
They showed up and I was like, oh, that's what it is. And then it also reminded me And then I realized for the first time, I was like, oh, what my children are to me is what I am to my parents. Wow, they love me more than I thought. It's this weird new understanding.
Sure. Going back to the saying, the journey.
Yes.
And its importance. I think there's also, I don't know if everybody intends it to be this way when they say it, but it's grounding in the sense that there's a gratitude component where, we're obviously extremely privileged individuals just to be on any journey at all. So regardless of the outcome you're working towards, it kind of like helps pull you back to the present to really appreciate what you're going through. And I think being in the moment is one of the things that's most important to developing and being open to learning and educating yourself in any sphere. So if you do really commit to the moment and to the journey itself, whether it's hard or easy or enjoyable or not, you're going to get loads out of it, regardless of the outcome you get. And in saying that, I mean, the outcomes become infinite in that you're creating so many branches every time you go on a journey.
Yeah. And that's why, I had to sort of focus on the language when writing some of the stuff down. And you've heard me sort of like correct myself a few times where it's like, you can learn a lot from them.
Sure.
I think too often, because we learn sometimes sort of by happenstance in like athletics, and it's sort of like a byproduct of learning a little bit.
Yeah.
We sometimes think, well, like that's all we can get from it.
Yeah.
And I would posit that there's so much more if we're hyper present, intentional about learning from the experience. We can get like orders of magnitude more in education from the experience than what we do most of the time.
We'll often get something we weren't expecting at all.
Yes.
And it could very well change the trajectory altogether.
Yeah. And leaving room for the unknown there, I think is in part something that allows that, which I think is beautiful, as well as the gratitude that it can all afford. And, once you've been through a lot of failures, and, a lot of successful people in athletics or business, they talk about how many times they actually failed, in proportion to how many times they succeeded. All of those failures, there were things they had to bounce back from, but that just gave them a lot of data points. And without all of the data points, maybe they couldn't have succeeded. It was a necessary condition for them to experience in order to eventually find success.
Right.
And there's a bit of arrogance if we think we know everything that it's going to take in order to get there. Just because it worked this way for someone else doesn't mean it will for us.
Sure.
We're two separate beings, completely different. We're always on different pathways, surrounded by different people. All of the conditions are unique within our own lives and mostly within us, like we talked about the bar graph. And so leaving that level of room, I think, is important, but it's a hard thing to do.
For sure.
Another example, you kind of brought this up with athletics. So another example, it says here I noted skipping the fundamentals to specialize early.
Right.
And I think this is a really tough thing for young athletes of all sports, because, they see Steph Curry shooting threes, so they want to start by shooting threes. And this is where feedback loops come in, is when you're in athletics and the focus is outcomes, winning games, putting points up on the board, putting the ball in the back of the net, then the feedback loop mechanism can throw us off. And that's why it's really important to begin with the vision, the thing we're aiming for.
Yeah.
So especially for kids, it should be development. If that's what you're aiming for, and truly the scoreboard doesn't matter. And I'm not saying second, eighth place trophies and all of that. I'm not talking about that.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about the thing you optimize for. Your decision making, your vision is about development. And so the decisions you make within that should be about development. So in this example, the first order of effect is the young athlete excels in their sport ahead of their peers. They make an elite team. They score the most goals, all of those things. That seems pretty great on the surface. The second order of effects is they plateau. Their body breaks down because the athletic foundation was never built. Their peers who developed broadly begin to pass them. This is something that I viscerally recall in my athletic journey.
Yeah.
Third order of effect is they burn out or they get injured before they ever reach the level their early talent suggested. The shortcut became the ceiling. And I've seen that one personally far too many times.
Right.
And I think that's where for some parents and their children, ego can come into play, especially very early. And that can kind of cloud their judgment. I think instinctively they would say, if you had a conversation with them, they would say, yeah, absolutely. The development of my child is the most important. Look how well they're doing. Clearly they're developing well.
Yeah.
As if the feedback mechanism is informing them that that's true.
Yeah.
And it's not. And that's where at times too, it's important to get feedback from other people that aren't so stuck in the weeds, especially for parents in athletics.
Sure.
And getting, and I mean, beyond the team coach.
Yeah.
Team coach is going to love that too.
Yeah, sure.
They're helping them win games. They might want development for all the players, and most of the players are developing, but if they can also win games, that's beautiful. Obviously not for every coach. Of course some can differentiate, but it's important to recognize that, their incentive structure can be winning games too, even personally.
Yep.
And so, sort of looking for other supports within your network in that decision making can be really helpful.
And particularly important for the younger athlete.
Yes.
Who they don't know the difference. If they're excelling at shooting threes, to your example, that kid's going to think that that's the best thing ever, and that they are developing and being an asset to their team and so forth. I don't think they have the power without a good coach or a proper mentor or those voices to help them understand that being well-rounded initially is going to skyrocket their development down the road.
Yeah. I remember with my brother, my oldest brother in this particular case, but the same thing was true for my younger brother. But in this scenario, he was sort of seen as second best goalie for this particular team. I was excited. And this is at the beginning stages of him transferring from being a player to a goalkeeper. And I thought this was great. I was so excited. And, the first instinct for my dad and my stepmom was, that's not great that he's being seen that way. But it's early. It's in the development phase of his journey. And I remember just saying this is great, because the last thing we want in development is for him to be seen as the best. He's the best goalkeeper in this small condensed pond we have in the geographical area where he's playing the sport.
Right.
Because there's not a lot of really great lessons he can learn from that.
Sure.
It's not to say that you can't develop beyond when you're in that position at all. I'm not saying that. But there can be an advantage.
Yeah, you don't want to be the biggest fish in a small pond.
That's right. It's an opportunity for early in his development for him to learn that, hey, you're not the best. And you're going to have to be humble about that. You're not. You can be. It's going to take work. So if you want to be, there's an incentive. Keep working and keep going and keep going and keep going. And there's so many lessons within that. Now, again, this is where like just passively letting lessons happen as a parent can sort of pass you by. You can sort of gloss over them. And so we made it a point to talk to him about those things. This is a really great opportunity for you. This is what you can learn. Hey, remember at training, this happened and this happened? That's great. You showed up, you want to be the best, but you're not. That's great. And we still have that conversation to this day now that, he's in Europe playing in an academy. Every single day he shows up is, he's fighting for his position.
Yeah.
Every new guest goalie that comes out for a trial is he has to compete with. So I look back in years past, those lessons have served him so well to continue to fight through that. He's not like a new goalie shows up and he's not like a deer in headlights.
Yeah.
Right? Especially if maybe they're performing really well and he happens to be having a poor session. He knows there's time. He's comfortable in that scenario and he trusts in himself.
Right.
And so those lessons early on have definitely served him today as, he's moving closer, striving to achieve his ultimate dream and outcome. And so I think that's true for all athletes in every scenario.
True. Yeah, it's also true in academia. It's probably applicable to anything in that there's the talent versus work distinction. It's not exactly the same as what you were just describing.
Yeah.
But a similar example is maybe a gifted student who is outgrown by their peers because they are hedging on their natural abilities.
Right.
And it's enough for a while, but after a while, it's no longer enough.
Right. Yeah, there's levels and they haven't learned the fundamental lessons.
Yeah.
Which, again, this is where transferable everything is intended to come in, is to refocus our minds on the importance of virtues, character development, and all of these things. They do matter. And they are worth us giving some time, attention, and resources to not just ourselves, but our children, society, etc. Because it does matter. It does serve us. It does help us in the third, fourth order of effects. And this is kind of the problem. And maybe this brings us back to the education component, which I don't want to continue to beat on, but it feels like it's very first order effects the way it currently is structured right now. It's not second, third, fourth.
Right.
And transferable everything, repositioning these virtues hopefully accounts for second, third, fourth order of effect. I'm going to give, just because I think the second, third, fourth order effects is really important to not to keep harping on, but I think use cases can be important. So let's touch on a few. Let's look at executives. So we're kind of like in the business phase. So sorry, I paused because I forgot one of them that I put down. I won't use. Okay. It's maybe a little too apt.
Fair enough.
Okay. So cutting the training budget during a downturn. So the first order is cost decrease. The P&L improves, the profit and loss improves. The board is satisfied. Now, it depends on how dire the scenario is. That might have to be the case. There is no choice.
Sure.
And so I think it's important to distinguish that sometimes there is no choice. Like, you can't worry about second, third, fourth, because if you don't solve for first order, second and third won't even matter.
Right.
Because they're off the table anyways.
Sure.
So I just want to, make that distinction. But in this case, it seems like the scenario is to satisfy the board. The second order is skill development within the team stalls. Leaders stop growing. The pipeline of future talent dries up. There's a lot that can be baked within that as well. The third order is when the market does recover You don't have the people to capitalize on it. Your competitors who invested through the downturn are now 2 years ahead of you. I think that's a good example because something like training is just so easy to cut. It feels kind of like a nothing burger of, it doesn't provide us a whole lot. A good example of that is that when you're growing and you're scaling with new market opportunities and things like that, if you don't have the talent, like I was describing, if you don't have the talent to optimize on those opportunities, you might miss them. You might get them, and then you might fail at them, which could be even more grave as a consequence than not taking them at all. And there's other things, and we've seen this. It means that, potentially you don't, by not having people ready to move up, you're stuck, or you're constrained by who you do have in particular roles.
Right.
And, that might mean in a scenario where you need to move on from somebody that you can't because you're stuck. You don't have anybody that can fill that role. And so now, in order to satisfy morale or other values you have as an organization, you need to part ways with somebody. But you can't because you don't have the team prepared coming up.
Sure, you've put constraints on yourself.
That's right. So I think in the working world, that's one. And I think a lot of times, this is where context matters too. From my experience anyways, a lot of business leaders and executives do consider these things. Maybe at least 1 and 2, maybe not to 3 or 4. But 1 and 2 for sure, I think they do. And sometimes where I've spoke with people who are sort of more experiencing the outcomes of those decisions, sort of look at it and understand maybe 3rd and 4th, or they understand 2nd and don't think that the executives making the decision understand it, but they do. They just don't have context to fully evaluate it. So that goes back to like the data points.
Yeah.
And so, if you're the one making the decision, hopefully you're contextualizing, you're getting all the data. And if you're the one sort of experiencing it, don't assume that they didn't have all the data and you happen to have all of the data.
Sure.
Recognize the position you have and how much access you have to it. And that's where like kind of leaving that room for the unknown. Maybe there's stuff I just don't know. And that's actually what informed the decision or the outcome. This is a good one for parents, and one I've wrestled with quite a lot. Choosing work over presence consistently. So first order is your career advances. Great. Income increases. You tell yourself you're providing for your family. And I think a lot of people, a lot of parents, they can be in that camp, and that sort of the end justifies the means in that sense for them.
Yeah.
The second order is your child stops asking you to be there, not because they don't want you, but because they've learned not to expect it. So that would be quite sad.
Sure.
If that was the case. The third order, the relationship becomes transactional. You provide financially, but they don't come with things that matter. You're in the house, but you're not in their life. And by the time you notice, the window where they needed you most has closed.
Right.
I think, there's been lots of movies made about those dynamics with parents and children. And, another one that they don't describe here, and of course it's all conditional and contextual, is sort of a fourth order effect, if you will, maybe, where you are present. So another consideration is now your child's old enough and, they have aspirations. And you start telling them, well, if you want to achieve that, you have to put in work. But you've been so present all of the time that you've not demonstrated what putting in work towards an outcome actually looks like.
Right.
So I personally think, because I've thought about this quite a lot, I think this one's solved with a lot of communication, good family dynamics and understanding, and recognizing that things shouldn't be constants. There should be seasons.
Right.
And so if you're going through a season where it's really important for your career to advance, to get to the next level, and whether it's for a monetary increase or you're working on a project, something you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And you're honest with your family about the need to do that. The other upside is then they get to buy in with you. It's the family achieving that. It's not just you.
Right.
We're sacrificing
your
presence just as you're sacrificing being present with us.
Sure.
This is a collective effort for an outcome. Once we achieve that outcome, doesn't mean you drastically take off your foot off the pedal at work or something like that.
Yeah.
But you return to a more balanced scenario. Maybe you can give back a little bit more to your family, thanks to whatever the means are that you've arrived at. But you've now given the best of both worlds, where the sacrifices you're making are as a family, and you've demonstrated the need to do that, and they're a part of it.
Sure.
So you've taught a lesson as well.
I would also add, and this is probably flipping the script that you've written a little bit, but that in the example you've given, there is choice. There is the ability to make that decision. Where there are going to be some circumstances, say a single parent household, where by necessity, in order to keep that child fed, they have 2 jobs, pulling double shifts, what have you.
Yep.
There are dynamics that are going to change just how much you are able to influence that relationship when you have that level of need.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what I was saying about the executive one, right? Is like part of evaluating the order of effects is if first order is so dire that if you do not succeed at solving that thing, 2 and 3 don't matter anyways. And if you only factor for 2, 3, and 4, let's say, it doesn't actually solve one in a meaningful way that's required to achieve the outcome, then that's the season that is. You have to make that decision, and hopefully you work to a point. And from a parenting standpoint, of course, that would be incredibly challenging. Because you have no choice but to sacrifice a level of presence.
Right.
I also think that's where it's an opportunity, if articulated appropriately, to help your child or children understand, there's some real harsh realities within the world.
Yeah.
And, I'm going to do this for us. But it's not just going to be me that's making the sacrifice. You are as well. And I recognize that. And here's the game plan. So what does the light at the end of the tunnel look like? It's where I think we can get to, not just this sort of bleak darkness of, well, this is just how it's going to be for forever. Few things are truly for forever.
As much as I hate that the conditions we find ourselves in allow for that type of decision to have to be made, there can be silver linings, even in the toughest of circumstances.
Totally. So many of the best lessons I've learned have come from the most dire circumstances I've ever experienced. And of course, in the moment, it's hard to see those things, and it really requires hindsight, self-reflection, and some time to sort of lick your wounds a little bit, and deal with whatever trauma that presented. But the beauty of it can be that there's a tremendous amount to learn from yourself, about the world, and so forth. Now, to add, there's a bit of paradox there in that, the story you end up telling yourself about that situation, you might have to revisit that story later in life.
It'll certainly change.
Yes. And that's happened to me, where I find myself in a new scenario years later, different conditions that feel similar. And the story I told myself previously, I was telling myself then, it no longer served me.
Sure.
It didn't make sense. And that's a tough thing to reconcile as well. Is, that there's the difference between, I think we talked about this in grit, right? Grit can serve you, and it can be the story you told yourself about why you succeeded at a thing. But that does not mean the next thing requires grit in the same way, the same level, and is going to contribute to the outcomes you want in the same way.
Yeah, it goes back to the when you're older, you'll understand. In a way, I think I've changed my tune on that, only in that there are some data points that are only gained through experience. And those stories change once you have the full data set. Where if I put myself in the shoes of the child with a parent who's not as present, I can think at a given age that I understand why they made that decision. And then I become a parent down the road and I experience certain hardships that change how I view that decision.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's where leaving room for the unknown becomes so important. That's where recognizing that someone else is in a position to have more data than you and appreciating that, especially if it's someone you trust. Like if you generally trust your parents, then trust that they're making the right decision. For the most part, not that they're perfect, but that they're trying to make the right decision, because you generally trust your parents.
Sure.
And so that's probably true in the scenario they're in right now, making whatever decision they think is the most important. And yeah, I think, I have a lot of friends who have looked back on their lives and how they evaluated their parents in those scenarios, and how they see things now has changed because they understand more of the world with more of those data points. I also think that's where there can be, so we're kind of giving, parents some of the flowers they deserve in there. Now, to be a little bit critical is that's where communication is really important. Right? Is like, and really trying to communicate with your children to help them understand that this is why. It's how you're probably going to teach them the lesson through the thing anyways. You want them to learn that sacrifices are necessary. Help them understand why you're making them and they're experiencing the outcomes of them.
Yeah.
It's a great, beautiful place. And not just once. Most of us need to hear and understand things multiple times over and over and over again.
Sure.
And especially when the landscape changes a little bit, right? Like those, helping them understand those things, why we're making those sacrifices, and make it a team. A family is a team. It's if we look back to sort of traditional farming days, where it was a lot more prevalent, it was the family that took care of the farm. The children had roles to play on the farm. I think family dynamics still need to exist that way. The family needs to achieve something. It needs to overcome the challenges of putting food on the table, just like you were describing earlier, in a very similar way. The outcome is the same need. The mechanism is different, but the dynamics to achieve that as a collective unit is probably the same. Now, maybe you're the child and you don't have to be the one milking cows at 6 o'clock in the morning and that's your task. It might be that you're just not hyper present with your parent while they go do the thing to put the food on the table. Conversely, the notion of like this hyper presence is a bit of a fallacy, I think. In that, like, if the family's working on the farm, everyone's going out during the day. They've got their tasks. They've got their things to do. And we're still coming back at night as a family. And I think as parents, that's where at least for me, that's one of the things I've focused on specifically is, I might work for a long period of time during the day, but like there's something about the evening and nighttime that's sacred.
Sure.
And so that might mean other things where I don't get to have an evening with my friends once a week or even once every 2 weeks or something that I did love previously. But that's where I can give back to the family. During the day, we're going out. everyone's working, everyone's making a level of sacrifice, and then collectively we're a unit back again. And that kind of ties into the co-sleeping thing, right? You know, if I think about the times where I worked quite a lot, especially when my kids were really, really young, I can't imagine if I didn't co-sleep with them. Like, that's valuable time that we shared together. And so if my relationship with them was like only the time I'm not working, but I'm trying to build something for them, and they happen every night to sleep in a different room, it only affords me, a couple hours of interaction. That only gets worse as they get older. But co-sleeping is also kind of afforded both of us, even in those moments, time where, okay, well, we're still together. We're snuggling at night. We're connected.
It's interesting how that pulls back to my statement of, if you have the time, take your time.
Right.
In terms of something that's deeply important to you.
Right.
Clearly your family is important to you.
Yes.
Right. You're going to want to take your time. If a decision is incredibly important and you're afforded the time, absolutely, take your time. I also think it's interesting in that we revisit time management in that as well.
Yes. Maybe that's a chapter that needs to be added to the book. Another chapter I was thinking about adding is patience.
Right. Yeah.
We're already at 25 chapters.
For sure.
Adding more is a lot, but if we're going broad but we want to be accurate, then it might be necessary. But I think you might be right. Time management might be an important chapter in of itself.
Sure. It's a finite resource.
Yeah. Absolutely. And
maybe resource management is a better way to put it. Because again, we only have a limited amount of energy to do the things we want to do within that period of time also.
I like that.
But my jump from time management to resource management is, we'll go back to the scenario of burying yourself in your work, but also balancing spending time with your family.
Yeah.
There's a time block, 100%, where you can be spending too much time in one place and not be afforded the amount of time in the other. But also, even if it is 50-50, but you're burning your resources on work, you don't have the energy to give your family what they deserve, what you feel you owe them.
I've experienced this, and it's something I've had to reflect on and get better at and so forth, because presence isn't just being there.
Right.
Presence is being present. And some of the earlier days where I was working a lot and in scenarios where I wasn't the most equipped for the thing I was doing. And so, I would find myself sitting at home, even if I wasn't technically working at home, I was thinking about work and solving those problems. And so, I'm sitting there with my kids, but I'm thinking about work. And, I'm certainly, even at the worst, I wasn't the most egregious for sure, but enough that it was a far enough distance from what I wanted to be as a father, or who I wanted to be as a father, and what I was actually doing, that I had to intentionally realize it and fix it. And I'm still not perfect at that. There's a tension between wanting to be that dad, building something for them, being ambitious, and so forth. And wrestling with that tension is hard. Yeah. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
Sure.
But it's an ongoing one. And I'm super sympathetic to parents who have that tension, because if you do want to build more for your kids, or you want to provide them presence and financial resources, well, in order to provide financial resources so you don't have to say no to the activity or the things necessary for them to do what they would like to do, it might cost that.
Sure.
Because even though you clock in and clock out, if you do that also mentally at your job, the likelihood or the probability that you actually excel at your job, clocking in, clocking out, including mentally, is pretty low.
Right.
If you're going home and you're thinking deeply about the things that happened at work, how you can improve both yourself professionally, the team that you're working with, value for your customers, whatever the thing is, if you're constantly thinking about that, the downstream effects of that are likely to be that you're going to improve broadly and increase value to your employer, which typically results in a promotion, some sort of career advancement, monetary compensation, whatever, which means you can deliver for your kids that thing. Because you can also be hyper present, but also then lack the resource, the financial resource, and your kid starts to excel at a sport, and unfortunately you have to say no.
Right.
Or incur incredible debt that hurts you and or them downstream.
Sure.
And so I think understanding that the tension exists, being okay with it, wrestling, and then trying to apply seasons. For this little bit of this small period of time, I'm gonna have to do this thing. And then hopefully not. All right, that's it for this week. Thanks to James and his wonderful effort of decision making. We're gonna ask that everyone listening makes the decision, intentional decision, to press the thumbs up button and to subscribe to the Transferable Everything podcast, whether it's on Spotify, YouTube, take your pick. We would really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you next week.